My prayer has been, as we go through Luke, that we see Jesus with brand new eyes. Stories that we've heard so many times sometimes fail to captivate us, maybe in the way that they were originally intended. When we left Jesus last week, he was being carried to the brow of the hill on which Nazareth was built in order to be thrown off. He had so offended his home crowd. Turns out that his teaching in the synagogue at Nazareth was entirely too inclusive for the Nazarenes, and they weren't having any of it. Which goes to show in his life, and perhaps in ours, that tragically, the people closest to us know us the very least. And it could be that we find ourselves in the midst of familiar company, feeling invisible. Perhaps wanting to be seen, acknowledged, affirmed for who we are, yet feeling as if we can't be ourselves where we are with the people closest to us. Each of the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, record following that event sort of a summary of Jesus' early ministry. And you know that the ministry of Jesus takes many twists and turns over the course of 3 years that we have recorded in the gospel story. But at least at the outset, there's a great deal of enthusiasm surrounding Jesus because of the manner in which he carries himself. He just comes across in a way that was markedly different than any of the rabbis or any of the other spiritual teachers on the scene in the ancient Near East. It says in Luke 4 and verse 31 that Jesus went down to Capernaum, a city in Galilee, and was teaching them on the Sabbath. They were astounded at his teaching because he spoke with authority. And there we have the thing that differentiates Jesus from the others. He taught with an air of authority. First thing to keep in mind here is a geographic thing, that he went from Nazareth to Capernaum, which was like going from a small, insulated community to more of a metropolis. Now again, to say metropolis in the Bay Area means one thing, in ancient Palestine means quite another. But Jesus was going from a very small, sect-based upbringing in Nazareth, and he was relocating. He was going to the city, to a more metropolitan, more of a metropolitan lifestyle, right? So he goes to Capernaum, which would have been a melting pot of more ideas and more influences from different parts of the world. And it says they were astounded at his teaching because he spoke with authority. In our contemporary postmodern context, we don't have a lot of experience with authoritative teaching. And when we hear that word, our mind goes elsewhere to like authoritarian, right? It's the same root word. But Jesus, when it says that he taught with authority, means that he was sort of possessed with an air of self-confidence that was not familiar to them. And frankly, it's not familiar to us either. We hear authoritative voices and we think either delusional or self-possessed. Not someone who had just sort of that gravity or weight to their words. That's what Jesus brought to the proclamation of the gospel that had been missing. In other words, it was very commonplace in Jesus' time for one teacher to stand and say, well, as we look back through the Torah, we see this, and there could be that, and maybe the other, and then another voice would come and say, some have said this, or possibly that. In other words, they were just swimming in ideas, and nothing really stuck. And Jesus came and spoke with an air of confidence that the people were unaccustomed to and unfamiliar with. They didn't know what to make of it. Remember what they said in Nazareth? Who is this? Isn't this Joseph's son? Isn't he the one that grew up here? Where does he get this teaching from? How does he know with such clear confidence and conviction the things of which he speaks? It's a great question. Then and now. How can anyone stand and speak with conviction amid such a plurality of ideologies as we have in our contemporary times? We'll get to the source of that, I promise you. Verse 33, along comes a man. In the synagogue there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried with a loud voice, "Let us alone, what have you to do with us? Jesus of Nazareth, have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." When the demon had thrown him down before them, he came out of him without having done him any harm. They were all amazed and kept saying to one another, "What kind of utterance is this? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and out they come." So not only his teaching, but now his power to exorcise demons is met with the exact same response. What is this authority? Where did this come from? We've not seen anything like it. The person perhaps had suffered for years on end and had no solution to his problem, had probably been to one healer, to one doctor after another, and nothing could be done. And along comes Jesus and just speaks. Digress for a moment here and look at the fact that the demon knew the source of the authority. The demon who had possessed the individual knew the power that he was dealing with. And always we have Jesus in the Gospels silencing the demons. Why is that? Wouldn't Jesus want the press and the notoriety? Wouldn't he want for everyone to know who he was and the authority that he spoke with? Here we have what scholars refer to as the messianic secret. Jesus tells them, shush. Because on his terms, not on anyone else's, will he be revealed, in his terms and in his ways. And so verse 37 says, a report about him began to reach every place in the region. So you have this growing interest, growing popularity in the teacher and healer who speaks and acts with authority. Verse 38, after leaving the synagogue, he entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked him about her. Then he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. Immediately she got up and began to serve. Another dramatic, instantaneous healing. And so, again, verse 40, as the sun was setting, all those who had any who were sick with various kinds of diseases brought them to him, and he laid his hands on each of them and cured them. Demons also came out of many, shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak, because they knew that he was the Messiah. What Luke does here for us in this sequence is like coupling the first event and response, the second event and response, and it goes to reinforce the same thing. It's the same thing that's happening. Jesus is exercising an incredible sense of authority that they hadn't seen or experienced, and people are drawn to it, and so they bring more people to him, and his popularity grows. Stands to reason, right? If we were to see someone come on the scene who spoke in a way that we've never heard anyone speak before, who acted in a way that was decisive and authoritative, filled with conviction, it would pique our curiosity. Well, verse 42 says, at daybreak he departed and went into a deserted place. And that sentence carries the secret to the authority of Jesus. Where does he get it from? He gets it from the deserted place. Verse 42. At daybreak, he departed and went into a deserted place. Because this is not only a once upon a time episode in the life of Jesus, but as Luke tells us in chapter 5, it was part of his custom. Verse 16 says, verse 16 of Luke 5, but he would withdraw to deserted places and pray. That was his custom. That was his habit. You remember a couple of weeks back when we looked at the episode of Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. That event in the life of Jesus, that 40-day fast, that time of testing and trial, became, or it established in his life, a precedent. That's how he was. That's what he did. That's how he was in the world. He would withdraw to deserted places and pray. That's where the sense of authority came from. Not because he was scrolling through the news feed on his phone. Not because he was watching the evening news. Not because he was reading from the New York Times bestseller list. Not because he was informed in all of the latest fads and fashions. The thing that set Jesus apart was his tendency to get away from it all. To explore the deserted areas, literally, geographically, and figuratively within himself. Jesus was willing to tame the wilderness within. And our capacity to speak with conviction and confidence and courage and authority will be reflected to the degree that we, like Jesus, are willing to do the same to escape the rush into deserted places. But now look, the crowd wasn't down with it then or now. The crowds, verse 42, were looking for him, and when they reached him, they wanted to prevent him from leaving them. But he said to them, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other cities also, for I was sent for this purpose. So he continued proclaiming the message in the synagogues of Judea. Ironically, the people of Capernaum, just like the people of Nazareth, were content with a Jesus for them. It's the very same principle. People of Nazareth wanted the same thing. Be our Jesus, heal our blind, give sight to our blind, heal our lame, but not so much the others. We want our Messiah, not a Messiah. Jesus wasn't content to be a provincial deity. Jesus wasn't only for the select few. And he arrives at that conclusion the exact same way that he arrives at his authority in those deserted places. Because Jesus' popularity is growing, and he could have just jumped on the bandwagon, and he could have stayed in Capernaum, and they could have built a huge stage and an auditorium and just asked the people, come on in and see our Messiah. And he would have been busy. It would have been a full-time occupation. But he said, that's not the reason that I came. The reason that I came is out there. It's not in here. I came for them. Look, the church is the one organization that exists for the benefit of those who are not yet here. And we thought that it was for us. Jesus' mindset, Jesus' direction from the beginning is outwardly focused. But people, whether they be the insular folks from Nazareth or the metropolitan bright minds of Capernaum, all want the same thing. Jesus for me. Human nature doesn't change that much over the course of time. And that tendency repeats itself and plays out again and again and again. What we want is our Jesus. Jesus for us. But by forcing himself into the deserted places, Jesus essentially keeps his own feet to the fire because he tunes himself in those deserted places to the voice of God. Where he can hear the Father whispering to him a sense of purpose, along with the authority to heal and to teach and to cast out demons. This is why you've come, for those not yet here. Same thing is true in our lives. That same sense of primary purpose applies equally to us as disciples of Jesus. And when we're capable of getting away from it all, of tuning out all of the outside voices. Here's a question. Is that word cacophony or cacophony? Cacophony. The cacophony of voices surrounding us in culture and in society. And when we're able to still those, to go to the deserted places within ourselves, and to, in that moment, reconnect with God, in an intimate way. That's what Jesus models for us. That's what he demonstrates for us. Whether it's the first thing in your day or a little later on, or the last thing that you do before you retire at night, it's imperative that we have a time alone with God. Away from distractions, a quiet place, somewhere that we can go to meet with Him. Nature's a beautiful place to do it. Maybe you're not a nature person. Maybe it's a museum. Maybe it's a park. Could be in the midst of people. As long as you're not interacting with them. You're not there for them. You're there for you. And the longer you're there, the more you recognize that you're not there for you. You're there for God. Deserted places where we meet with God, where we hear Him whisper our worth, where we gain a sense of wisdom, where we capture a sense of mission and purpose. Jesus takes us there. I want to invite you to take a moment and pray with me imaginatively. Meaning I want you to find that place as we pray. Be there in your mind. The closet of prayer, where is that for you? The garden. Remember the old song? I come to the garden alone. All the dew is still on the roses. Father, you have so much to teach us and much to say. Yet our lives are busy. And we're distracted making a living and making love and making our way. God, amid our muchness and minniness, we want to hear. We're unaccustomed to it. It's unfamiliar and therefore uncomfortable. But God, you can teach us and you can grow us in ways we've not grown before. You can show us new things. You can birth in us a creativity, God, and help us to discover a way, a personal way, to meet with you daily that's meaningful and that impacts our life and the lives of those around us. We thank you for the example of Jesus, who made this such a priority and whose life made an incredible impact as a result. That's what we want, nothing less.